Yeah. So going into that initially can be disconcerting because your life is wrapped up in, you know, being pressured by all these things to behave in certain ways, and then suddenly the pressure's not there, and you think, uh-oh, what's wrong with me?
And the stuff is still there. The threshold is different.
Right. Exactly. The threshold is different. So what begins to happen is that you know, things just don't bother you. And eventually you get to the point where hardly anything can bother you. And everybody, you know, you start off with this person that had this trauma in their childhood, and their threshold is really low, and they're always reacting to everything. Anybody ever know anybody like that? Anybody ever been anyone like that? Well, so then they do the program for a while, and I haven't really calibrated where this point is, but at a certain point they get so that their threshold is up there at the, you know, where the quote-unquote normal person is. And then it goes higher. And pretty soon the people that they always looked at as staying calm when they were freaked out, those people are, you know, freaking out, and they're not. Because they're more mellow now than that person. They're more able to deal with whatever comes at them. The other thing that this model describes that we see all the time is people that, as they're doing the program, seem to be at their threshold almost constantly. And a lot of people think that, oh, this must not be working because I'm pissed off all the time, or I'm feeling down all the time, or I'm anxious all the time, or what. So when you experience these emotions and behaviors that go with them, it may be because the technology is pushing you right up to that threshold as part of the process of pushing it higher. And it seems to you like you're in the same place you were when you started. A lot of times people will go through Awakening Prologue and they'll say, wow, you know, I really do feel different. Things don't bother me as much, and all these other changes have happened. Then they'll do Awakening Level 1 maybe, and then they'll say, yeah, I feel even better. Then they'll go into Awakening Level 2, and suddenly they'll really hit a deeper level of stuff. And suddenly they are just as pissed off, or just as bummed out, or just as anxious, or whatever, than they used to be, before they started, and they think, you know, I thought this was helping me, but it hasn't. I'm just as, you know, angry as I ever was. But they actually aren't, because it's not that the amount of anger they have is the same. See, a typical, particularly pop psychology view is that you've got this anger inside you and you've got to get it out. And if you get it out, then you'll be okay. Or you've got this sadness inside of you and you've got to get it out. And I don't think that's the way it is. I don't think you've got this big bag of stuff inside of you, and if you only emptied it out, you'd be fine. I think these are not, it's not like you have this quantity of stuff in you, whether it's anxiety or sadness or fear or whatever. It's that everyone has the capacity for being angry, down, anxious, whatever, fearful. And it only comes out when you're pushed to that threshold. There's nothing in there that you have to get out. It's just as the threshold goes up, it takes more and more to get to the point where that gets triggered. So you don't have to worry about getting anything out of you. All you have to do is get that threshold to go higher. And there's a big difference between being pushed to anger by a threshold, you know, when your threshold is here, and being pushed to anger when your threshold is here. It's kind of like you're a runner. And I mean, it's sort of like if you were a runner and you went out and ran 1 mile and it was hard. And you got to finishing the 1 mile and you went, oh my God, that definitely pushed me over my physical threshold for what I can handle. So then you go and you do your running every day for months and months and months. And now you're running 10 miles a day, because you're in a lot better shape. Your threshold for what you can handle physically is much higher. So you go out and run 10 miles, and at the end of the 10 miles, you feel the same way physically as you used to feel when you finished the 1 mile. Because again, you've pushed yourself right to that threshold. Now, would it make sense for you to say, God, I have been doing this running all this time, and I'm in no better shape because here I am, I finished a run, and I still feel tired. That's the same thing as if you're in Awakening Level 4 or something like that, and you're listening to these tapes and you're going, God, I'm still kind of pissed off. And thinking that you're no better off than when you were pissed off when you were in Awakening Prologue. It's just that pissed off is the way you have chosen to cope, whereas somebody else may be choosing to get depressed or be anxious or whatever. And that's your favorite as far as dealing with being overwhelmed. And you've been pushed much farther, but you've finally been pushed to that threshold. Does that make sense? Am I getting across what this means? So if you're, on in the program a ways, and you're exhibiting the same emotions, the same dysfunctional feelings and behaviors as you were earlier, it doesn't mean you haven't improved. Because if you, in fact, somebody wrote me a letter a few weeks ago saying that same kind of thing, that they had been in the program for several levels, and now they were acting just the same way as they were before. And so I wrote back to them and explained this to them. They stopped using the tapes for about 2 months. And then they wrote me a letter again, and they said, wow, I cannot believe the way I am in the world now. They had taken off the pressure that was pushing against that threshold, and suddenly they could see from that perspective then how mellow they were and how much nothing bothered them. And then they realized that if they started up again, they very well could be pushing against that threshold again, and if they pushed against it, they were going to begin to exhibit their favorite coping mechanisms again. Now, what I've noticed is that a lot of people pick one as their favorite, and then they have a backup. For me, my favorite was being angry. And I used to walk around with a black cloud over my head all the time. And you know that guy in Little Abner, the cartoon that had the black cloud over his head all the time? Well,
Joe Blitzfist.
Joe Blitzfist. No. Portland is a wonderful place. What are you talking about? You poor people that live in California have no idea. Poor suckers. We want you to all stay in California. You can keep your governor, too, and his energy policies, although ours isn't much better. I used to have this black cloud over my head all the time, and everywhere I went, I infected everybody with this negativity and this anger, and it was pretty toxic from what I'm told. And my backup, though, was getting depressed. So when I was pushed, which didn't take a lot with me because I had a fair amount of trauma growing up, when I was pushed, I would go into this anger thing, and I was angry a lot because my threshold was pretty low. If pushed further, then I would get depressed. And there are people that are exactly the opposite. They get depressed when pushed, and then if the push continues, then finally they'll get angry. So most people fall into one of those categories. So I believe that all these coping mechanisms, all these dysfunctional behaviors, that is, are really just coping mechanisms, and that the real key to getting past all that stuff and living a life that is at least sprinkled with, if not full of, dysfunctional feelings and behaviors, is to raise that threshold. Most approaches try to treat the symptoms. They try to treat the anger in some way, or they try to treat the depression in some way, or they try to treat the fear. And to certain degrees, those things can help. But the root cause, in my opinion, the root cause for all these manifestations is that the person doesn't have a threshold high enough to handle the environment they're in. And once that threshold is higher, then all that stuff falls away. Now, of course, if life pushes you far enough, that stuff can come up again. And there's a way actually to get it to the point where it hardly ever comes up anyway. But that's as we go on a little farther and start talking about chaos theory, which will not be today. But does this make sense to you? This thing about threshold? I think that's why the program works, because it raises that threshold. And I think once it raises that threshold, I suppose that it would be possible to suffer some sort of a trauma that was so horrendous, even after it was high, that it might lower it. But I have not seen that in people in the program.